hivi zote zitakuwa zinategemea basi ni mikopo na ruzuku mbalimbali kutoka kwa mataifa ya nje na vile vile uombezi wa humu nchini. Mtazamaji, tukiangazia masuala basi ya mikopo ni kwamba taifa la Kenya, kulingana na makadirio ambayo yamepeanwa na Waziri Ukur Yatani na ambaye atakuwa anachambua leo hii katika majengo ya bunge, ni kwamba ile mikopo ya nyumbani, ukipenda local borrowing, mtazamaji, itakuwa inagonga shilingi bilioni 572.7 hivi. Alafu itategemea sana kwamba mikopo nyingine hii itakuwa inatoka katika mataifa kitaifa, mataifa ya nje, mtazamaji, ambapo kutakuwa na bilioni 427.5 mtazamaji, ambazo zitakuwa zinaombwa kutoka taifa la nje. Tukao tunaangazia basi itakuwa namna gani, manake kwa sasa hivi tunajua kwamba kuna deni la kitaifa ambalo pia ni kubwa zaidi, na sasa hivi tena tunategemea kwamba wataongeza tena madeni mengine ili kwamba wafikie basi makadirio haya ya trilioni 3.6 ambayo Wizara ya Hazina ya Kitaifa imeyaweka katika bajeti ya mwaka 2021 hadi 22 mtazamaji. Lakini kabla tuende sana, ningependa tu nikupatie taarifa ambayo tumekuwa tukiicheza tu wiki hii nzima tukiangazia masuala ya bajeti, taarifa ambayo ilifanywa na mwenzangu Chris Sambu kuangazia ni akina nani wale ambao basi watapokea na wale ambao watapoteza, wafaidi na wale ambao watapoteza katika makadirio ya mwaka huu wa 2021-2022.
Hazina ya Kitaifa Alhamisi juma hili inatarajiwa kutangaza mojawapo ya bajeti kubwa zaidi kuwahi kusomwa kwa taifa, makadirio ya mwaka huu yakifikia shilingi trilioni 3.632, ongezeko kutoka kwa bajeti ya mwaka jana iliyokuwa shilingi trilioni 2.9. Katika bajeti ya mwaka huu, serikali inakabiliwa na kibarua kufufua uchumi uliodorora pamoja na kukamilisha miradi ya maendeleo. Katika pendekezo la bajeti mwaka huu, tawi la serikali litapokea shilingi trilioni 1.879, bunge la kitaifa likipokea bilioni 37, nayo idara ya mahakama ikipokea bilioni 17. Hazina ya kitaifa imepunguza makadirio kwa baadhi ya sekta ili kupiga jeki sekta mbadala. Baadhi ya sekta zilizoathirika zaidi ni ikiwemo miradi ya barabara, vyuo vikuu na sekta ya umeme. Shilingi bilioni 8.9 zimepunguzwa, hazina ya kitaifa ikisema kuwa imelazimika kupunguza miradi ya maendeleo na matumizi ya fedha kufuatia hali ngumu ya uchumi. Katika bajeti ya mwaka huu, kampuni ya umeme ya Kenya Power imepokea pigo la kupunguziwa shilingi bilioni 1.5, hili likizamisha ndoto za kufufua hasara iliyokadiriwa kwenye mwaka wa kifedha 2020-2021. Kadhalika, vyuo vikuu ambavyo vinashuhudia uhaba wa fedha vitapokea pigo la kupunguziwa shilingi bilioni 5.3. Wizara ya Ujenzi ikipunguziwa shilingi bilioni 3.5 kutoka kwa miradi ya nyumba za bei nafuu. Hata hivyo, miradi ikiwemo kazi mtaani ambayo inanuia kuwapa vijana ajira itapokea kitita cha shilingi bilioni 3 kwa bajeti ya mwaka huu, bilioni 3 kwa ujenzi wa bandari ya Lamu, ujenzi wa reli ukitengewa shilingi bilioni 2. Wizara mbalimbali zinatarajiwa kupokea ongezeko la bajeti kutoka kwa mwaka jana, huku serikali ikipania kukabili hali duni ya uchumi pamoja na kufadhili utendakazi wa wizara mbalimbali. Kulingana na takwimu za hazina ya kitaifa, serikali ilikusanya ushuru wa shilingi trilioni 1.19 kufikia mwezi Aprili, asilimia 4 chini ya mwaka jana, huko macho yote sasa yakielekezwa Alhamisi katika bunge la kitaifa kubaini ni nani atakayenufaika na ni nani atakayepokea pigo la bajeti ya mwaka 2021 mwaka 2022.
Na mtazamaji, huyo ni Sambu akiuliza swali, je, itakuwa namna gani basi? Lakini maswali yenyewe yapo, majibu yatakuja baadaye tu wakati ule ambapo Waziri wa Hazina ya Kitaifa Ukur Yatani ataingia katika majengo ya bunge na kudondoa yaliyomo kwenye makadirio ya bajeti mwaka huu hadi mwaka ujao, mtazamaji. Lakini inakuwa namna gani basi? Tunajua kwamba trilioni 3.67 ndiyo makadirio ya mwaka wa bajeti 2021-2022. Lakini je, fedha hizi zitapatikana namna gani? Manake tumesema kwamba wanategemea tu kwamba kipato cha kitaifa kinaweza kikafika angalau shilingi trilioni 2 tu. hizi nyingine zitakuwa za mikopo. Itakuwa namna gani? Basi tupate taarifa nyingine kuhusiana basi na jinsi fedha za kuafikia malengo ya bajeti hii zitapatikana. Atakapoteremka vidato vya jumba la Treasury na kupigwa picha na wanahabari, na baada ya dakika chache za kuhesabu kuandamana kwenye msafara wake hadi majengo ya bunge, macho yote ya Mkenya yatamlenga fika waziri Ukur Yatani. Matumaini ya Wakenya hawa kuhusu gharama ya maisha kwa muda wa miezi 12 ijayo yakitegemea kilichoko kwenye ule mkoba wake maarufu. Tayari taarifa zimeweka wazi kwamba makadirio ya bajeti ya mwaka wa kifedha utakaofululiza hadi Julai mosi mwaka ujao yatagonga kima cha trilioni 3.6, kiwango ambacho hakijashuhudiwa tangu uhuru wa taifa tukufu la Kenya. Kiwango hicho tayari kimewaacha wengi wakijikuna kichwa jinsi makadirio hayo yatakavyoafikiwa, haswa ikikumbuka kwamba mara nyingi bajeti hutegemea ukubwa au udogo wa pato la taifa. Kulingana na mapendekezo ya Wizara ya Hazina ya Kitaifa, trilioni 2.03 zitanyofolewa kutoka pato la kitaifa, huku trilioni 1.57 zilizosalia zikitegemea mikopo na ruzuku mbalimbali. Waziri Yatani ameweka wazi kwamba ataitisha mkopo wa kima kipatacho bilioni 900. Lakini je, wataalamu wa masuala ya uchumi wanasemaje kuhusu swala hili? Nazungumza naye Odhiambo Ramogi, mwanauchumi wa miaka mingi.
Kwa sababu uliosema ni around 60% ya GDP,
yes,
ni deni tu. Hii inamaanisha kwamba at least hata tukipeana 100% ya pesa tunazopata kama revenue, serikali ikilipa na hiyo pesa kila mwaka kwa miaka 5, bado tutakuwa hatujalipa deni tuliona. Kwa hivyo tuko mahali pabaya.
Kwa miaka 7 sasa kiwango cha deni la taifa kimekuwa kikiongezeka. Mwaka 2013 deni hilo likiwa trilioni 1.3, lakini sasa miaka 7 baadaye kufikia Machi mwaka huu deni hilo limegonga trilioni 7.34. Kulingana na mwanauchumi Ramogi, Wakenya hawana budi kuzidi kujifunga mkanda, maana mambo huenda si rahisi hivi karibuni.
Serikali imekuwa na nia ya karibu miaka 3 sasa ya kutoza ushuru ama kuongeza ushuru kwa bidhaa kama mafuta taa inayotumika na mwananchi wa kawaida. Kwa hivyo hii itaendelea, sio ni tofauti.
Je, huenda malengo ya Rais Uhuru Kenyatta kutaka kufikia ajenda zake kuu 4 yakawa chanzo cha ugumu wa maisha ya Mkenya wa kawaida?
Shida iliyokuwa kubwa na Big 4 ni implementation. Kama anaweza tia bidii, aende mashinani, aongee na viongozi wa mashinani, ahakikisha kwamba vitu hivi vimekuwa implemented, nafikiri hapa takuwa na shida.
Yote 9, 10 ni kwamba Wakenya wana shauku kubwa kwamba huenda mambo yakawa magumu zaidi iwapo swala la ufisadi halitapata suluhu ya kudumu. Na mtazamaji, basi ndivyo hali ilivyo. Taarifa ambazo tukua tukizifanya tu juma zima kuangazia basi siku hii ya leo, siku ya mbuzi kuliwa ama mbuzi basi kumla yule ambaye ndio mtunzi wake. Mtazamaji, ni naye kwenye studio mchambuzi ambaye atatusaidia masuala haya, Bwana Francis Mathea, ambaye ni afisa mkuu wa masuala ya kifedha katika kanisa la PCEA, ambaye pia ni mwanauchumi mkuu. Karibu sana Bwana Mathea. Yeah. Karibu sana. Jambo ambalo tumeliona is that 3.67 trillion ndo estimates for the year 2021-2022. Wengine wanasema kwamba, Waswahili wanasema kwamba ni kama mtoto mdogo hana meno, anajaribu kuchukua kipande cha nyama kilichoko na mafupa makubwa. Wazungu wanasema you're biting more than you can chew. Sijui kama are we being ambitious with our estimate for the year 2021-2022?
I think we are really trying as a country, trying to see how best we can do. But then I think there are fundamental issues that as a country we are forgetting. That as we expand the capacities of our budget, 2 things must ring in our mind. Where are we getting this money from? One of the two critical areas that the government is looking at in getting this money is Wanjiko. More taxes, and continue, even how heavily burdened he is, he continues to pay more. The next area that is also looking at is borrowing, which now stands at 7.3 vile tumeona pale. The question is, for us to grow, and I can bring together the four agenda, the Uhuru's four agenda, for us to grow and have a balanced growth in the economy, and where everyone else, is comfortable, is that also two things that must also the government consider. As you're raising the debt, as you're raising the taxes, how much more are you embarking in terms of the private sector development, so that they create wealth that you can be able to continue putting those tax measures? The reason is, if you look at for the last 9 years, during the period of Uhuru Kenyatta, the private sector is not enjoying the credit facility available to it, because the internal borrowing that the government continues to do is huge, and therefore you'll find that the Mwananchi is competing with the commercial banks, whether the commercial banks are going to lend Mwananchi or they are going to lend to the government. The government is easily the best option to lend by the commercial banks, because their interests are lower. I mean, they are higher in terms of bonds and treasury bills. And they have risk, almost free risk. I mean, there's no much risk in terms of lending that money. But when you look at the Wanjiko, when they weigh between Wanjiko and the government, there is that opportunity that they are going to give that money to the government as opposed to Wanjiko, because Wanjiko carries a higher risk in terms of lending. And therefore, the credit squeeze that we experience in this country is depressing the private sector in terms of growth. And economy of a country is driven by the private sector. So if you don't nurture the private sector, no matter how much you want to do good things in terms of the four agenda, and you don't balance the two, you'll find you have higher debt to pay, a lot of, because when you put infrastructure, good infrastructure, as we can see, and of course we're putting food on the table, but then the roads, they are good. But when Wanjiko has no money in the pocket to do business, what is that load for?
The roads are just somewhat of urembo tu.
Yes, urembo tu. Itakuwa ni urembo. Utakuta some areas in our country, unakuta tu buzi ndio zinarara kwa rami. Because there is no business that is drive. And I pray that as Uhuru is trying in his final agenda, in the final term, especially in the area of manufacturing, which is critical, that can only be the area that we can turn around this economy and be able now to create more employment and to create more exports, so that our economy continues to grow.
Very well. Kuna watu wengine wanasema kwamba that the estimates for this year, the financial year that we are beginning in July 1st, is only 36% of the GDP, because our GDP is around 10 trillion as a country. So 36% is not that bad.
No. You know, sometimes I say our GDP is 10 trillion. If you look at the overall borrowing that we have read, is approaching to almost 9 trillion in terms of almost balancing with our GDP. What the impact that loan is growing has a ripple effect to the economy of this nation, because you continue paying interest on that. It's keep growing. And we are not at a stage where we are saying we are a developed country now, we may reduce in terms of borrowing. We are still a growing economy. So there's more need, you'll find the appetite for borrowing continues with the readers to do so. Because of course when Uhuru exit and another president comes, he will not just stop. He would want to do things. He will now start thinking about a 4 trillion budget. But remember, if what we are borrowing is not commensurate with how we are creating wealth in the country, then we are not growing. We continue seeing us moving from 5.6, like now the depression that we had growing almost by negative in 2020, then you will find us not growing at 2-3, because the input that we are putting in terms of wealth creation and the output is higher. than what the economy requires us to do.
You know, we are in a dispensation that we are dealing with a worldwide pandemic, COVID-19, that has affected economies worldwide, not only in Kenya. And we know that our GDP was projected to grow by last year before COVID by 7.1%.
Yeah, that's right.
But it just grew in the negatives because of COVID-19.
Yes.
It's now that it's gaining somewhat, our economy is gaining by 1 point something percent.
Yeah.
But again, we are going to go for more borrowing, more debt, because Ukur Yatani, the cabinet secretary for National Treasury, has to fund the budget estimates that he is going to propose, that he's going actually now to put in Parliament this afternoon. We know that the local borrowing, I mean, that's what people are saying might help instead of going for the foreign debt. The local can do 500 and something billions. Then we are going to go for the rest, because the estimate for borrowing are going to be around 900 billion, according to the estimates by the National Treasury. So the remaining 400 and so are going to be foreign. Do you think that local borrowing is going to be like a caveat as far as debt is concerned?
You see, economy is a matter of balancing. It's a balancing act between external borrowing and internal borrowing. When you heavily borrow in the internal, it has a ripple effect, because I said it will create an economy that is almost cashless. The credit squeeze that you get into a country where small micro enterprises business cannot access to credit. Normal Wajiko cannot access credit, because you go ask for a loan in a commercial banks, and you are evaluated basically on the number of the level of risk that you possess, and you find the commercial banks not being keen to give you that facility. As opposed to external borrowing, because borrowing, whether internal or external, has a cost. And for the government, it is availability of funds that is supposed to look into. And then ask itself, if I can access external borrowing at a better rate, then I'll be better as a government to borrow externally as opposed to borrowing internally. There are levels that you cannot go in internal borrowing. Let me bring an example. During Kebaki's time, if you remember, we had a time that banks were hawking for people on streets to give money. Why? It's because when Kebaki came in and he saw knowing the effect of
too much
internal borrowing, he went out. But he left the commercial bank to fund the private sector. And that's why the bank had a lot of money to go out and of course ask for credit, those who are interested. And you look at the time at that time, the economy grew to 7 something. And you remember Kebaki saying that we are now funding our economy almost to 90 something before post-election, if you recall.
That's 2006. Yeah, before just 2007.
Just before 2007. We are almost 90% funding our own economy. But then a spin-off took off and we started borrowing heavily, because again, when you borrow, the other question is, what does that money do when it comes to Kenya? The corruption issue. How is the government able to manage that corruption issue? Because if in 100 shillings, 60-70% of whatever 50 to 60% is going to waste, in terms of corruption, and you're left a margin of 30, so to speak, then what can you do? Yet the burden comes on you. So the major focus of a government, this Uhuru as he exit our president, is I wish he would concentrate more on building the capacity of our institution to fully fight corruption. Today, you know, my colleague, you walk up out of driving on the road. The first thing you find a police officer asking for something.
100 or so.
Until such a time that you walk 100 kilometers and don't find a policeman asking, that is the time you'll say, Kenya is really fighting corruption. But today, things are not good in terms of fighting corruption. And that's one should be at the agenda, because when that waste is capped, it will go back to doing a lot in the economy. And then
So you have a reservation on not just going out for borrowing, but how is this money that is borrowed going to be spent?
Yes.
Because if the larger chunk of that is going to corruption, then what's the point going out for that money?
That's it.
Because the president himself a few months ago said that he knows that 2 billion shillings a day goes to corruption.
So how much is that? You can imagine in 12 months, if a day
720 something billion,
you can see the spiral effect of that to the economy. And as much as much we would wish to dwell on that, I think the onus is with the government, because it has all the machinery and all it takes to fight this corruption. And I hope that can be done, because going forward we can be able to see an accelerated, I remember stories told about countries like China, where there were serious people when a certain time a president came and would kill. He would pass a law that when you're caught on corruption, you will die. And that transformed and reduced the corruption almost to bare 5% minimum. So this country, the greatest enemy that we have now for our economy is corruption.
Do you think we need to go the capital way, capital punishment way? And
for me, let me tell you,
corruption?
If you look at the effect that corruption is doing into this nation, and how the institutions were supposed to generate, they are declaring, the parastatal are declaring losses. But if you critically look at why, it's because of high cost of things being done, because they are exaggerated for corruption rip-off. We should escalate our punishment in terms of law into those perpetrators of corruption. Before we reach the death sentence, we should accelerate 20, 30 years in prison, 50, if you are caught on corruption matters. Yes.
Awesome. Remember that we are following keenly the events at National Treasury Building and also Parliament, and we will be taking you live to Parliament whenever the CS for National Treasury, Ukur Yatani, arrives in Parliament to read out the budget for the year 2021-2022. Now, before we take a break, I want us to talk about something here that is also very important. You know, part of this budget estimates are going to pending bills. There are people who supply the government, and until now they are not yet paid their dues, and that amounts to around 300 and so billion, although the figures are not clear as such.
You know, my brother, sometimes as a finance person I ask myself, what is a pending bill? We know for sure, and through the Procurement 2015 Act, you will find that before you commit to procure something, you must confirm, and the Treasury must confirm that the vote book has money. Right?
Yes.
So, how comes then that following these particular processes, that you find you have pending bills merely because the money that was there during the time of procuring, which the procurement team and the Treasury confirmed that there is money in that particular vote book, when it comes now to pay, we prioritize other things. That is what we call financial mismanagement. And that is what it is costing us. Because that money, when it is redirected to other areas that was not meant to pay that, then it leaves the contraction that were to be impactful to Ajiko in disarray. Because some other people saw there was something that was beneficial and they misdirected that particular resource. That is an area of financial management which the Treasury and the audit should step up their ability to ensure that there is no issue called pending bill. Because there is no, under the law, you cannot procure something that you don't have resources for. So how do you then generate pending bills? It is because of financial mismanagement in our institution. And that is a critical thing that the government should look into. Because you know corruption after an year end, when we have at the end of June, when Treasury is crossing off the financial year, there are returns that are made, there are supplementaries that are made on monies that we had that we have returned, but because there were some projects that are unfinished, they should be rolled over. So that money is rolled over together with the contractors who are not paid. Then how do they become a pending bill?
A big question.
A big question.
A big question that needs to be answered.
Yes.
I want us to talk about the priorities of the government when it comes to spending, because we know that this time the budget, the biggest junk is actually going to the Big Four agenda. But
exactly.
Are they priority for that? But before we even look at that, I want us to play a story done by my colleague Aida Monzati on the universal healthcare and of course COVID-19. Last year, the government released finances to boost the fight against COVID-19 in erecting walk-through sanitizers. Were they viable? Tuangazie taarifa hiyo iliyofanywa mwenzangu Aida Monzati.
Mgao wa bajeti ya mwaka uliopita kipindi cha 2020-2021 katika Wizara ya Afya iliongezeka kwa 10.3%. Wizara hiyo ikipata bilioni 114 ikilinganishwa na mgao wa fedha kwa wizara hiyo kwa miaka za awali.
The fourth theme prioritizes improvement in health outcomes. Evidently, the COVID-19 pandemic has overstretched our healthcare system.
Ikizingatiwa janga la corona, bila shaka lilikuwa wazo nzuri kwa wizara hiyo kupata kiwango hicho cha fedha ili kuweka mikakati husika na kupambana na ugonjwa wa COVID-19. Kando na ufadhili kutoka kwa mashirika mbalimbali, Wizara ya Afya ilitengewa bilioni 1.2 ili kuwaajiri wahudumu wa afya 5,000, milioni 500 ili kuagiza vitanda 20,000 kwa hospitali za umma na milioni 25 ili kutenga maeneo spesheli ya vyeuzi vya kunyunyiza.
Currently 1.2 billion is proposed for the recruitment of an additional cohort of 5,000 healthcare workers to support local health staff for a period of 1 year. This will enhance our COVID-19 response capabilities and strengthen implementation of the universal health coverage program.
Lakini je, fedha hizi zilitumika namna ilivyofaa, haswa ikizingatiwa changamoto mbalimbali zinazokumba wizara hiyo kwa sasa? Nyingi ya hospitali za hapa nchini zimeripoti ukosefu wa vitanda vya wagonjwa, huku ikiwa wazi kuwa serikali za kaunti zilitengewa kitita cha pesa ili kusambaza vitanda katika hospitali za umma kwenye kaunti.
We have also allocated an additional 500 million to supply 20,000 locally made beds and beddings to public hospitals.
Wakati huo huo, Wizara ya Afya imepokea ufadhili wa fedha na vifaa vingine vya afya juu ya fedha zilizotengewa wizara hiyo na serikali ya Kenya. Katika suala la vyeuzi vya kunyunyiza, maeneo hayo yalitengwa katika sehemu kadhaa hapa nchini. Lakini je, bado maeneo hayo ya kunyunyiza yapo?
Hii kitu ilifungwa.
Kama kaunti imeshindwa kupiga maji, ni mtu binafsi hasa utaweza kupiga hiyo dawa. Sasa unaona watu wote wazingatii. Juu hata kama wanaona serikali yenyewe imeshindwa, ni wewe mwenyewe binafsi hasa utatoa pesa wapi ya kununua sanitizer?
Katika eneo hili la Kitengela, maeneo hayo yamefungwa na kuzingirwa na nyaya, kiashirio sahihi kuwa huduma hizo hazipo tena, ilhali mamilioni ya fedha yalitengwa ili kutoa huduma hizo kwa wananchi na kuwakinga na maambukizi ya virusi vya corona.
And 25 million to support the establishment of 50 modern walk-through sanitizers at our border points and main hospitals across the country.
Hatujaona hii kitu ambayo ni hema haitumiki kuanzia wakati huu.
Hii kitu inakuanga na maana sana wakati tulikuwa tunatumia. Na sisi tunashindwa, hii kitu imefungwa, sasa siku hizi hakuna kutumia.
Na I think management yake ikawa haiendelei. Kila mtu alikuwa anapitia hapa ndani. Hiyo ndawa inanyunyusia kila mtu. Sasa ni kazi ya county government ndio watajua.
Hata hivyo, kuna baadhi ya hatua zilizopigwa na Wizara ya Afya, ikiwemo ile ya kuwaajiri wahudumu wa afya katika kipindi cha mwaka mmoja uliopita, lengo likiwa kupambana na janga la corona. Sekta ya afya ni miongoni mwa sekta zinazotarajiwa tena kufaidika katika bajeti inayosomwa hiyo kesho. sababu ikiwa bado makali na maambukizi ya korona yapo juu na mikakati zaidi inafaa kuwekwa. Lakini je, ni vipi wizara hiyo inawajibikia fedha wanazotengewa?
Let's renew our commitment to ensuring that we can save each other.
Na umeona taarifa ambayo imefanywa na mwenzangu Aida Mzati kuhusiana na yale maeneo ya inaitwa fumigation ama ya kupita, yani maeneo ya kupita ndo umwagiwe, ufukiziwe zile dawa za kupigana dhidi ya COVID-19 virusi vile. Maeneo haya yapo kwa sasa. Maeneo haya hapo. These booths are no longer existing.
Yes.
Do you think we hardly needed this? Was it a priority? Because 20 billion also went into this venture.
You know, as something like that, as when a project starts, it just starts in a boardroom where somebody had an honest mind. But the moment now that policy goes for implementation, those who goes to implement now puts their personal interests across. And you'll find something that was hurriedly done and quickly done in a smart way done and things put together. When we receive what we wanted to receive because of our personal interest, 2-3 months later, it's not interested anymore. It is not a priority anymore. And you leave elephant things, projects, you wonder what really happened. Was somebody serious that he started such a kind of a project and left? No, it's only because those who started had the good idea. Those who implemented brought in their self-interest, squandered everything, and left their project dying. That's our culture. And if there's anything that this country, God helping us, that we need to do, is to address the moral fabric of our society. Because the moral fabric, right from being done by the churches and the government advocacy, if that is not addressed, we are not headed into the right direction.
Popote.
Yes.
Na mtazamaji, tutakuwa tunakuchezea picha za moja kwa moja jinsi maandalizi yalivyo katika upande wa jumba la Treasury, ambapo Waziri Ukur Yatani anatarajiwa kushuka tu na basi kuangazia masuala yalivyo, kupigwa picha 2-3 hivi na kuelekea moja kwa moja hadi katika majengo ya bunge. Mtazamaji, tutakuwa unapata picha hizo tu kwenye runinga yako. But talking about the spending for I mean funding the project, I mean, we know that COVID-19 is still very much within us. We're not yet out of the woods, as people say. And I know it's a priority, right? From where you're seated, to fight COVID-19 so that we can improve our economy. Do you think that much of the budget should look into how to revive the economy because of COVID-19 or what?
Yes, what I want to say, I'm really grateful for our health sector and our health teams, personnel, for the way they have helped this country to fight the COVID-19. They have worked tirelessly to be able to see that we are safe as a nation. Congratulations for them. However, I would say this, no matter how much you find the way we have funded this health sector in the last 1 year when we had this COVID, you still find the workers complaining. You still find the workers not satisfied in the way that we are doing things. I think it is the high time that the health ministry needs to be keenly on improving the management of these particular health facilities. Because I believe the government is funding in the best that they can be able to do, although there is still a gap that we need to fund this particular health sector. But in terms of management, in terms of the PPEs being available at the right time, in terms of prevention, in terms of preparations within the healthy sector, I think that is an area that the government needs to put more feet to manage whatever they are doing. You may give a lot of resources to do that, but if you don't manage those resources at the point where they are being used, then you'll be assured that the same corruption will take away with those resources, and you'll be left workers still complaining that despite the fact that you funded those particular institutions.
Yes, we have priorities for this budget. Tunajua kwamba kuna vile mambo yamepangwa yatakuwa, and we know that pesa nyingi zitaenda kwa the big four agenda. But what do you think is the priority so that we can revive our economy post-COVID? Of course, it's not as much as post, as we call it, not essentially post, but post-COVID-19. What do you think should be our priority in terms of spending the budget estimates that are going to be put forward in Parliament this afternoon?
Our first priority should be where we have the niche as a country. What is this country's niche in terms of growth and in terms of building our economy? One, the backbone of this country is agriculture. If I look at the 4 agenda and I see Uhuru having the food security, that is agriculture. And in as much as the 4 agenda are given about 1.8 billion through the executive, I think the drafters of the 4 agenda knew exactly where the country requires to be given a boost. In the area of manufacturing, is a critical in terms of creation of employment. Is a critical area in terms of boosting the exports of this country. But my question is, even with that kind of funding that we see, 1.8 billion, would it not be just the usual prolifications that we see and wastage of resources? How sure? At least I can give a thumb up on the critical area of infrastructure. Today, go to this country, everywhere there is development. We can see roads being constructed, tarmac roads are being done. That is kudos for our president and for his government. But how is he going to secure to see that in the area of, for example, manufacturing, that the correct technology? How are we going to enhance the correct technology? How are we going to boost our creativity and innovation in this country? Because Kenyans are very outgoing in terms of entrepreneurship. How is he going to capture that particular area to ensure that there's turnaround in all areas, in all sectors, in terms of manufacturing? The management of that is a critical. How we start, who do we entrust in that particular area is critical in terms of if you have to make impact of that. You remember the laptop issue in education.
Oh, yes.
It was funded. We bragged about it. Where is it now? What happened?
Project.
What happened? Yes, the president had the best mind about our children, but who were given this to implement? What happened to the Ministry of Education? What can they tell us? What happened? What went wrong? Because we can see it's just children still asking for the laptops. What happened? So I'm saying, even as we appreciate the CBC, for example, the education in the CBC, that part went quiet. We do not know what happened. So the drafters and the mind that creates these developments are very good. But our managers, people who implement, what happens?
And the problem.
We need to create structures and systems that when we give money, that money is really put into the real use.
You know, the Big Four agenda, some people, the financial experts, are calling this project legacy project of the outgoing president. And he's going to, because he has, say, a year or so before he vamooses out of the governing of this country. He's pushing so that his legacy is felt when he goes out of the Harambee offices or even state house. But do you think that's a priority, especially when it comes to matters in infrastructure? He's doing well, but don't you think that they're being too burdensome on normal Mwananchi, Wanjiko?
Well, the truth is yes and no. On the terms of funding this 4 agenda is a tall order. 1.8 trillion is not small money. that we see the executive being funded. And of course, combined with what the national government is also receiving, 1.9 trillion, combined, you'll find almost 2.7 trillion that is going to there. But the question is, yes, it is a good thing to do the fourth thing, but where is this money coming from? As I said, from the private sector. So the private sector is being denied the growth at the expense that we shall do it. The money has been gotten. It want to do the same project. Now, when it comes to do that project, corruption eats it. So Wajiko has been taxed, highly taxed. We have borrowed, we have heavily borrowing, but when we come to implement, it is at the preliminary, but when it goes down, it's dead. That is the problem that we should administer. The management of our resources in this country is a big issue, as well as balancing between internal and external borrowing. That is what the president also needs to address with the economists.
Sure. Now, because I think we should be catching a break in a short while, but before we go to the break, I want us to talk a little bit on the aftermath of what we're going to see, actually the consequences of the biggest budget in the history of this country. Of course, the taxes are going to go high. There are commodities that are going to be taxed. That are going, so that we can fund
my brother
this budget.
Yes.
But even before I give you time to talk about that, I want us to play two stories that pertains to fuel, because we know that this page
is 122, 123 now.
Yeah. Can you have those stories, Banalio?
Mgao wa bajeti ya mwaka uliopita kipindi cha 2020-2021 katika Wizara ya Afya iliongezeka kwa 10.3%. Wizara hiyo ikipata bilioni 114 ikilinganishwa na mgao wa fedha kwa wizara hiyo kwa miaka za awali.
The fourth theme prioritizes improvement in health outcomes. Evidently, the COVID-19 pandemic has overstretched our healthcare system.
Ikizingatiwa janga la corona, bila shaka lilikuwa wazo nzuri kwa wizara hiyo kupata kiwango hicho cha fedha ili kuweka mikakati husika na kupambana na ugonjwa wa COVID-19. Kando na ufadhili kutoka kwa mashirika mbalimbali, Wizara ya Afya ilitengewa bilioni 1.2 ili kuwaajiri wahudumu wa afya 5,000, milioni 500 ili
we played a wrong story, but I know that my director is working on that to make sure that we get the two stories that we want to look about maswala ya fuel prices and of course the gas. We know that these are going now. The gas has not been taxed for a while now, but now it's going to be a taxed commodity beginning July 1st. My director tells me that now we are ready. Can you get the stories, Leo?
Kupanda kwa bei ya bidhaa za mafuta ikiwemo mafuta ya petroli na mitungi ya gesi ya nyumbani mapema mwaka huu ni swala ambalo limepelekea Wakenya wengi kusitisha matumizi ya bidhaa hizi hasa kwa mapishi ili kuona nafuu. Hali hii ilitoa fursa nzuri ya kupata umaarufu kwa mtungi wa gesi ya tokeni inayolipwa kadri ya matumizi nyumbani.
Nilikuwa natumia stove. Alafu by then when I came to realize that it was around, nililetewa.
Before nilikuwa natumia gas ya kucharge kawaida. Nilikuwa na charge by month. Nikaona nimepatana na gas kwa barabara yenye na charge kila siku.
proposal by the National Treasury but to introduce excess duty on motorbikes at a rate of 15%. So a lot is coming forth just to help you know, this particular figure, 3.66 trillion shillings, to become a reality. But it's a budget also that is coming just a few months. I'd like to look at it that way, not a year before the lapse of the second term of the Jubilee government. The Jubilee government had a very ambitious plan to achieve the big four.
Treasury, Mr. Ukur Yatani is already at the steps and ready to take pictures from the press, and before he heads straight to Parliament, you can see him together with top officials in the Ministry of National Treasury. He is, of course, with the famous briefcase, now taking a few walks down the aisle, if we call it, down the steps, taking a few more pictures from the press. And of course, we know that he will be headed to Parliament in a short while, but he is taking more pictures. Of course, you look at that briefcase, the life of Kenyans depends entirely on what is in that briefcase. And we are going, of course, to know what will be happening in the next few minutes, because I know it's already exactly 2 p.m. So he will be headed to Parliament, and around 2:20 or so, we are going to hear exactly what is in that briefcase. Mr. Amadea, what do you think is the heart of Kenyans right now? How is it pumping?
Of course, the heart of Kenyans are racing because they have seen the preliminaries, the 3.6 trillion of budget. And what regards to many Kenyans now is the tension that more taxes, fuel prices are going to 122 now retailing, 107 in terms of diesel. And of course, the ripple effects of that. Fuel, when it goes up, it has a ripple effect because everything else goes up, is pushed up. The only thing I want to hear personally is how is he intend to caution the Kenyans in terms of these huge taxes that are raising. I looked at his preview, and I've seen that the gap that is the bigger gap, that is 1.5 trillion, that is going to top up, will come from another critical areas too, which is said. One is that he will be able to do a lot of tax audit, and organizations and institutions and personals should be now ready that the tax money will be coming to do the tax audit. He also is intending to create a platform where people can report without being known. Report Omus, my colleague, if he has not paying tax, they report you. You know, he's creating that kind of web. You know, pahali Kenyans wanasemana, hujalipa kodi na huwa analipa kodi, so that he can continue raising. But I don't think that is the way to go. You need to have a very candid and robust way of correcting taxes and knowing you may not increase in terms of those who are paying tax, but expanding the tax bracket. Where there are areas, for example, I know in the real estate, is not being as funded, is not, the revenue are not corrected as it were. And there are critical areas that they would you know, encourage other people to venture into certain businesses by motivating and giving tax holidays, so that this certain business grows, and then you are later on you are able to task that business. But most of the time, I saw in the social media somebody saying that he started a business before he even would do one year. Mtu akajua amekuja kuchukua pesa ya license, bado na peka ile pesa alikuwa na 100,000 yote imeenda na kaju, na ile ingine imeenda na nando. Now that person has closed the business. Now where is the government in this? Where does this continue? There must be a way. And I remember last year Uhuru trying to say, our president tried to say that this young entrepreneurs should be given tax holidays, 7-year tax holidays, so that you begin a business without any tax, so that when it grows, you're now in an ability to be able to fund your government to do the businesses it does. So I think we will wait to see, but this kind of huge budget, when I critically looked at it, it is really going to hurt
the common mwananchi. The common mwananchi should be prepared with this kind of budget.
Yeah, because we anticipate that things are going to go high as far as commodities are concerned. Gharama ya maisha itakuwa ngumu zaidi. Inflation might even go high. Of course, the government projects that until December, we might have a growth of 2% as far as inflation is concerned. But before I give you an opportunity to talk about that, I wanted to play a story here that my colleague did on the steady increase of food commodities prices before we go back to the story of fuel. Because you've gone into talking about now the prices, the ripple effect of the taxes. My director Leo, if you're able to play that story on the steady increase of food prices done by Faith Kaulu, so that we have a basis to talk about the effects of the taxation that might go high, so that we can be able to fund the 3.6 or so trillion budget 2021-2022. All right. My director is looking for that story, but talking about that, we talk about bread. We've had noises here and there that bread now is going to be taxed, and of course I know that I don't know if you are a consumer of too much bread. I know say it's around 55 bob for 400 gram bread.
If I'm not consuming, my children are.
Yeah.
And you remember me, when I was in secondary school, I bought bread at 50 cents. Ikakaa sana tukainunua at 50 cents. Yeah. So today, I'm not very old. It is at 55. 55 shillings. The question is, what are we doing? Because if that is growing by the day, it is not the bread that we see that is growing by the day, is actually the cost of living that is growing by the day. So the question we need to ask is, government, how is the government, the economists, try to address our economy so that we can be able to reduce the suffering, the pain that Kenyans are going through because of increased cost of living. So that's a major issue. And I said one of the areas that I've been advocacy in saying is the critical areas of, for example, SACCOs. The SACCOs provide the good credit facility for the common mwananchi. But recently I saw through SASRA a review of the law that is prohibiting the SACCOs from raiding more than 5% of their institutional capital. That's a very dangerous area, because what you are saying is that if I have savings of, if a SACCO that I am saving with has, for example, 30 million as its core capital, they cannot be able to raid me more than 2 million as their core capital. I would require, if I want more than 2 million, I would require to go to a commercial bank. And that should be critically be looked into, because we are pushing people now from cooperative SACCOs to go back to the commercial to borrow. Why? It is because who owns these banks?
Sure. I'm told that the story is ready now. But before the story, looking on your screen, you see that now that's the vehicle, the VW that is carrying the minister, call him the CS, the Ministry of National Treasury, Okorie Yatani, on his way to Parliament buildings, where he's going to break down the budget 2021-2022. And of course, we'll be taking you live to the Parliament buildings once he's in there. But that is his entourage taking road through Harambee Avenue, to Parliament Road, and then of course into the gates of Parliament buildings, where he's going to be received by the National Assembly Speaker Justin Turi into the chambers, and of course he's going to delve deep into the budget 2021-2022, and we expect him to take almost an hour or so of breaking down the estimates 2021-2022. And we know that you will depend on CAC TV to bring you live the event that will be unfolding in Parliament in just a short while. And of course, we'll be together with my panelist here, Mr. Francis Mathea, who is going to break down what is going to happen, how the figures are going to be brought forward by the CS Ukuriatani. But you can see his entourage majestically taking road into Parliament. Of course, tumezoea sana haya maeneo, Bwana Mathea, wanakwenda kwa kipole sana, hawana haraka wala mbio yoyote, because we expect that in a few minutes, of course, at around 2:30, that is when he'll take into the chambers and break down the estimates 2021-2022, the budget as it is concerned. Always heavy security. The case, you see police officers on the right, on the left of the entourage, as they take route to Parliament, and of course, that is a very important occasion right now. This is historical, of course, being the highest budget of the history of Kenya as a nation since independence. 3.6 trillion, up from 2.8 last financial year 2020-2021. So this is very historic. That is why he is taking his time, slowly taking road into Parliament. Bwana Mathea, even as we await him to be at the Parliament buildings in a moment, let's just talk about the SMEs. They're saying that this budget has not really looked into the small and medium enterprises to really grow it.
And that's our critical concern, because the SMEs, medium and small enterprises, as I said earlier, they help drive the economy. They are the ones who are able to turn around and generate wealth faster for any economy to grow. They are the ones who create employment in a nation in a big way, so that there is, the growth of economy. But when our budget is not addressing that lower level of the economy that drives it, it means that after this budget, after the exit of the president, there is also going to be a repercussion out of it. Because we ask ourselves, the foreign agenda, the housing issue, yes, we'll have the houses. How many people will afford those housing that are being constructed? There's going to be food on the table, as they say. The affordable, meaning the issue of putting the food security. Yes, the food will be, those who are able to, will be able, but is a common mwananchi going to have money in his pocket to buy that food? Is a question. When you talk about the manufacturing, and we continue to feed, are the products that we are creating for manufacturing, are we able to ensure that manufacturing is put into areas that quickly can absorb the majority of people, or it will just force the rural urban migration to where maybe those industries are? Are they going to be centrally in the rural areas? What is it that the infrastructure is going to provide to create wealth for them? Do we have an innovation hub of things that we want to produce, to reproduce? China economy has grown merely by copy pasting. See a technology, see what you have done, they prepare their own. They did not invent. It is now that they are inventing, having overtaken quite major economies. But Kenya, what is it that we want to do? Where is the blueprint of these industries we want to start? What are they? What are we going to do? What really are they in relations to our economy? I think that the government need and continues to have gaps in those. Yes, we have very good agenda, but the basis as to which you build this sometimes is what is lacking. And that is the major, because you see this budget, if it does not address that, and we shall see how because when we see is actually a key focus of the Big Four agenda, which we hope that if it has proper managers, then it will create an impact. But if it doesn't, and it continues to be like any other project that the government has started, then it will leave us deep in a deeper hole than otherwise would have been had we not have this agenda.
So what you're saying that we need to look into proper management of the Big Four is not a bad one,
yes,
especially the manufacturing, because that's going to create jobs. We know our country is really struggling in terms of creation of employment, but manufacturing is a key sector when it comes to growing the economy and of course creating jobs for the populace of the country.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying, that the management of it is what is there. Let me talk about, for example, this country had the everyday when we are growing up, and everyday was ever, being there in the television. Recently, I visited Nakuru to look at those where that company was. The factories that were there, they are no longer there. They used to create a lot of employment. Maybe that brand may have been bought by other companies or other whatever, but I'm saying the many companies that have collapsed, manufacturing industries that have collapsed, would rather first resuscitate them back, recreate them, innovate them, let them be where we bounce, where we pick as a foundation before we establish the new ones.
Yeah, sure. I mean, even as you continue to say that, we are looking at the live pictures courtesy of the national broadcaster, KBC, coming to you live. That's now, I think they're still on, they're closer now to Parliament Road, heading to Parliament buildings. And of course, that is an entourage of the CS National Treasury, Ukur Yatani, in that car number one there, of course, the GKB, the VW that is carrying him. And of course, the briefcase that is so important right now. The most important thing in this country at this moment is the briefcase that is being carried by the CS Ukur Yatani, headed to Parliament, courtesy of KBC Channel 1, beaming you live pictures headed to Parliament, what is happening. And of course, we are going to bring you live the events even from Parliament itself. They're taking quite long than usual, Mr. Madea, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's
the drive has been really long.
Yeah, it is his day before he tells us what his budget implication will be on our lives. And I sometimes ask myself, my colleague, why is there not a protracted public participation in preparation of budget?
I think there is a public participation, although not as public as we think it should be.
That is a man-made public participation, a well orchestrated, where it doesn't affect or nobody knows that there is a public participation. Yeah. But what I know is that there should be a consultative effort on institutions, private sector. Preparations are enough. Areas of critical areas that you would feel that every individual, every sector wants the government to focus on. For example, the churches, they will give their concession where they feel that the government should allocate money. And this should be a process culminating up to today, that whatever budget is being read is a process where every Kenyan, every institution has participated in one way or another in terms of development. That can be even more easier to implement, because we will know this is part of what we said. But this country sometimes, because people say there's public participation, but Gazette a day, how many people read the Gazette notice? Very few.
Then who is who?
Then who is who? And then when you sit there, you have 100 people, and you say that is a public participation. No, it is not.
It is not.
It is not.
Yes,
So,
now this is the CS of National Treasury, Ukur Yatani, live now into the gates, through the gates of the National Treasury, the National Assembly buildings. This is just his car now entering into the Parliament buildings. And of course, in a few minutes, he'll be received by the Speaker, the National Assembly. This is Justin Muturi. We are waiting for that moment, which is very historic. But again, he's going to do a few photos before that happens. But as you can see, security very much beefed up at the Parliament buildings. Before he enters into the chambers. Of course, he is now out of his vehicle. He is headed into Parliament. Now there he is being received by the Parliament officials, including the National Assembly Speaker, Justin Muturi. The CS out of his vehicle, in his hand holding tightly onto the briefcase that is carrying the estimates of 2021-2022 budget allocations. And now having a few chats there, of course, lining up for a couple of photos and pictures here and there with the officials of Parliament and, of course, the officials from his ministry. Of course, well clad, smartly clothed, as you can see, in very sharp suits, Italian suits, we may call so. Of course, the briefcase in his hand now, ready to take a few pictures before he enters into the chambers of the National Assembly. CS Ukur Yatani doing his second budget reading duties. Remember, he replaced the former CS Henry Rotich, who was set aside after implications with corruption. And now Ukur Yatani doing his second budget reading duties at Parliament, taking pictures. It is a tall order. It's not an easy job to be a CS for National Treasury.
yeah, well, I'm telling you, if you ask me, you know, I was been a CS for finance in Nakuru County.
Yes.
And this is, if there's anything that is really mind-boggling,
yes,
is that particular docket, because you'll be required to, you know, consolidate all those matter of figures and whatever. And I remember personally in the county government, we would advertise a week every sub-county that we are making about a process. And we will receive a lot of recommendations, and especially when it came to the issue of finance bills, because the finance bill is the revenue law that will help you raise the funds that you fund the budget with. At that time, I would see a lot of participation. I hope that the government can enlarge this space of participation in making this particular budget, so that when they say they will raise the tax for fuel, when does Wajiko say yes or no? Parliament, who is presumed to represent Wajiko, when they sit, and of course they listen to the government, you find most of the time they are more inclined towards the executive as opposed to the Wajiko. And that leaves Wajiko a bit vulnerable, because the other day I looked at a pay slip at the beginning of this January, and you find the kind of tax that went up almost by 15,000 an individual would lose in terms of the tax that you are paying. 2, 3, 4, depending on how much you earn. You know, that goes directly to Wajiko, right at that domestic home. So even as we continue enlarging the tax base for example, the salary that one earns, the government should be cautious. You should be more cautious to tax the business I do than the earnings that I earn in terms of salary. Because that way you are bound to help me develop more, and you tax more. Yes.
A continuation of pictures now. The CS for National Treasury, Ukur Yatani, with the officials there, taking a few more pictures of course, with various individuals who want to be a part of this historic moment of budget reading 2021-2022. Still taking a couple of pictures, being given directions here and there on what to do, and of course later he'll be added into the Parliament, the National Assembly, to be precise, chambers, to do the budgetary reading 2021-2022. Of course, I told you earlier that he is doing his second budgetary reading duties after replacing the former CS, Henry Rotich, who was implicated with Martis corruption. Now Ukurietani there, after pictures, of course, going through the normal protocols there before going to the chambers. Of course, we are going to bring you live the reading of the budget live from Parliament in a moment, but together in studio, together still with my panelist, the economist, and of course the financial officer, PCEA, Bwana Francis Mathea, and must say that you are doing a great job in breaking down what we expect as Mwananchi. Wanjiko, you're a big fighter for Mwanjiko, if I must say that, from what you're saying. Now, 7.33, that's the debt of the nation as we stand. And after today, it might go high.
Be 9.
Nine.
9. Yes.
What do you think this is? They just a trillion shy of the national GDP of the country's GDP.
That is a big effect. Because one is that the national debt continues to run for many years. And therefore, it has a big effect for generations to come. If this debt is used in the right way, then we can say, and it is generating, you see, when you borrow for development, that development that you make is an asset that is supposed to generate revenues so that you are able now, that revenue, to cater for this debt. But if you look at the analysis that we have here, and the kind of money that we are paying 1.3 trillion in terms of that loan. You will ask ourselves, has we been able to develop to the extent that when we are paying 1.3 trillion, we are comfortable? If we are paying 1.3 trillion and our overall income that we are generating is 2 trillion, then really, whoever hata kama ni nyumbani unapanga mambo yako, really you would ask yourself that if I'm only about 700 million difference between what I'm getting as a nation and what I'm paying,
the current expense,
then there's a big problem, because it's just a matter of time before the owners of this debt can own Kenya. Because if I am unable to produce 2 trillion and I'm giving back 1.3 trillion, and my appetite for even borrowing more is still growing, then it means it's a reach a time when we say Kenya will be technically insolvent. In terms of liquidity, because the liquidity that we are generating as a nation, 2 trillion, versus what we are paying, 1.3, is almost 70% of what we are generating. When it reaches there, even in the finance, we say a debt portfolio beyond 60 is bad, and that's where we are headed in terms of this analysis. So the leveraging of that, Yatani needs to tell us how is he going to generate more revenue without taxing. You know, if we are seeing exports growing, companies growing, similarly, like for example, Safaricom is growing. If all companies have a similar trend of growing, we would be very, very few comfortable. But how many have able to grow and have billions of money in terms of net profit? Very few. Look at KQ. Very few. They are struggling. Parastatos, Kenya Power, they are all struggling. There's nothing. So where is this economy? The industries that we the agriculture, what is the export? In terms of our tour, tourism, is of course heavily affected by COVID.
Yeah, sure.
Very, very affected by COVID. Agriculture is not equally doing well. Those two are the backbones of the economy of this country. So how is the attorney going to turn around the tourism sector? How is he going to turn around the agricultural sector so that he can leverage the two and be able to uplift the manufacturing sector? Because those three pillars are the ones that can drive the economy.
Sure.
At the same time, how can he revitalize the private sector, which is the fourth pillar, to be able to push the economy?
And again, another way of, trying to fund the budget is to reduce the expenditure, the recurrent expenditure of the country. Of course, we've had noise that is going to cut a lot of budgets into other ministries so that he can cut those expenditures. Because, 1.86 trillion goes to recurrent expenditure, and that is a big amount.
Of course, of course.
In terms of salaries paid to officials and all that, a big chunk of that money.
If we are able to, we say salaries in any organization, the best percentage you should be getting is about 35% to 40%. In an organization, its total revenue the salary should constitute between 35 and 40%. That you would say is a health organization. Now, if this country is paying 1.8 trillion in terms of its recurrent expenditure, and you are generating 2 trillion, my brother, where are we?
I'm told that we will be going live to Parliament now to follow the proceedings because the CS is headed and walking into the chambers. You can see the Speaker of the National Assembly, there's Justin Turi, headed into the chambers now, and anytime it's about to welcome the CS Finance, the CS, National Treasury, Ukurietani, into the chambers. So we will take you live into the Parliament chambers for the proceedings. Of course, for the protocols first, of course, we are going to hear the national anthem play, and of course, headed now into this Parliament. Of course, now I'll take you live because the Speaker, Justin Suri, is giving his remarks.
It is the just government of the people. We beseech you to behold with your abundant favor as your servants, whom you've been pleased to call to the performance of important trusts in this republic. Let your blessings descend upon us here assembled, and grant that we treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote your honor and glory, and to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country, and of those whose interests are committed to our charge. Amen.